So this part of our program is a bit different than what we had initially planned and hoped. And even before I read what I've written, it's interesting to even start this coming from having had this sort of like very quick interaction with the person who's about to come up, Patricia Reed, and speak to us, because I actually wish I'd gotten to speak to you more. And so much about this is about communication and networking. And I hate, once again, communication, networking. These can all be said really superficially. But I think a lot of what people are finding, especially after the past couple of years, is how important depth of communication and depth of connection is. And you need that depth in order to be able to bring something fully out of it. And so before I go into this, I'm saying that to say I wish I'd had more time. But we will have time tonight. So, in a perfect, explainable, and rational world where things happen as we expect for them to and as we wish for them to happen, right now in our program, we would have been joined by the brilliant artist and writer, Diann Bauer. Instead, I am sad to announce that Diann has recently passed away. And I know that we cannot make up in any way at all for all that is missed by not having her with us, but we would like to take the time to celebrate her celestial effects and to honor her existence and all that she has left us with. This was actually a hard section to prepare and a hard section to write. So when thinking about how to introduce her and how to somehow summarize all that she has done from my very distant and limited perspective, I find myself kind of trying to have to imagine her on her way to get here. Imagining her doing the mundane and ordinary things that people do to get from point A to point B, because it's something that we all share. I guess she would have traveled here from London after somehow having managed the impossible task of packing up a bit of the vastness of her experiences, her work, and her thoughts within the carry-on of herself, alongside the more mundane and relatable baggage such as, I don't know, a toothbrush perhaps, maybe books, a phone, I'm not sure, ordinary things she thought of as being dear and necessary for traveling. I unfortunately never had the honor of meeting her, so this is all what I thought. But I imagined it, and so much of our experiences of life are those mundane, those simple actions and needs that connect us all, that somehow transfers across our complexity and our individuality, and much of what it means to be human is recorded in those minutes. Much of what it means to be alive and much of what it means to just desire. And in a way, I suppose, in writing this, I needed to humanize Diann. Having not known her, I needed to humanize her in my mind's eye in order to try and introduce her in some small way with the same honesty that her life deserves and that her work so obviously inspired. And so I pictured her traveling and preparing away from the theories and the sculptures and the various other physical mementos and manifestations that she's thankfully left us with. But in doing this, while imagining her traveling, I found myself connecting to her work and her legacy in a much different way, because when I view Diann's work, I felt, especially when I first saw it, I feel as though my brain and emotions are racing through a back catalog of cerebral impulses, historical propaganda, unearthed nostalgia, while somehow being confronted with the consequences of my mortality and of society's most mundane desires. And all of those things, these perceptions and memories, rely on the shared reality of what we are, of what we create as societies, as cultures, and as another competing and coexisting life form within this barely explored universe. As merely a spectator, it seems to me that everything Diann did and left us with was created through the radical artistic intervention of a fierce free mind who never stopped working to make this world a more beautiful, more equitable, less oppressed, less bullshit, and less violent, and more symbiotic and honest place. And for all of that, I say, and also on behalf of Creative Days, I say thank you, Diann Bauer. You will be missed. And so with that, I'm going to invite a friend of Diann's and also the co-author of the book, the Xenofeminism Manifesto. Xenofeminism Manifesto. I even like the way this sounds. Anyways, I'm going to take this moment and invite the artist Patricia Reed up to the stage, and she's going to give us the keynote that Diane would have given us and shared with us today. So, thank you. Thanks. Yep.
Thank you. Thank you. That was such a beautiful tribute. And thank you for staying. This is obviously not going to be an easy one, so I ask you to bear with me. But I'm here today as a kind of proxy and a person to talk to you about the artistic and theoretical work of Diann Bauer. So you're seeing some of her artworks before you. Their directness of address, this is something that continues. It kind of compresses an imbroglio of geopolitical significations with the density of a semantic black hole. So that's like the maximal amount of energy in the smallest of phrases. So as we said, it was Diann who was invited to be before you today. And in her brilliant, and I won't lie, kind of enviously cool self, you would have seen a much cooler person before you, who tragically succumbed to illness a few weeks ago. But as a friend and one of several collaborators fortunate enough to have worked alongside Diann over the years, you can kind of understand why, in a selfish, mortal sense, this is the last talk I want to be doing. It would, however, be a betrayal to Diann's ethos to indulge in that morose hoarding of her numerous contributions, as she always practiced her talents with a generous spirit, enabling the joyful empowerment of thought in everyone she engaged with. She would have been the last person to sort of dwell in that solipsistic immobility, but rather invent purpose from the all-too-human experience of grief that periodically envelops us all throughout this brief time on the planet. So her body of work steadfastly counters this tidal pull of melancholy that psychically haunts this historical present, demanding of us not to withdraw from reality, be that withdrawal a heedless form of optimism, right? Endless rosy-colored nonsense, or in the guise of capitulating to climate doomism that petrifies us into quiescence with a fatalistic message that nothing can be done. Neither modes of reality withdrawal are accountable or commensurate with the shared crises of this moment, despite how unshared in responsibility and acuteness of threat. So Diann's work rather summons us to both think and enact the constructability of modes of coexistence anew, with empathetic and, as you already picked up on, humanitarian realism. And this was a kind of a beautiful turn of phrase by a mutual friend, Robin McKay. So to clarify, hers was no form of what is understood as political realism, that being exemplified by this sort of listless call to be realistic, often cast as an insult towards those recognizing the need for systemic, multi-scalar, socio-technical transformation. Diann's work was as cosmic in scope as it was inseparable from commitments to the betterment of human life in the mundane every day. She promiscuously wedded her practice to questions of technology, infrastructure, emotional bonds, the evaluation of value, scientific and practical knowledge, as well as wealth and risk distribution, all of which is dependent upon a humanly inhabitable planet that is today pushing the boundaries of brute livability in several regions. So probing material, cognitive, and operational affordances from a motley crew of disciplines, often infused with her signature dry humor, Diann's search for points of leverage from which to rebuild worlds from the scraps of this decaying present is an approach belonging to no discipline, because it is a manner of doing that is practicable in any discipline. So to me, this is the necessity and urgency of her work, especially in a room of designers and technologists and potentially entrepreneurs. It prompts us with lines of conceptual inquiry, playfulness, and what we can think of as concrete speculations to be synthesized in conditions of futural flourishing. We may come to actually actualize and potentially desire, rather than a future simply to be feared. So it's because of this catalytic disposition embodied by Diann's work that I'm both honored and humbled to be here with you tonight. So, I knew about Diann, I knew about her through mutual friends. Like I said, she was very cool. I knew about Diann through mutual friends long before a serendipitous workshop called Emancipation as Navigation brought us together at the Haus der Kultur und der Welt in Berlin in 2014. It was one of those rare 12-day events convening an improbable cohort of artists, mathematicians, logicians, philosophers, political scientists, programmers, design strategists, as well as gender, complexity, and literary theorists, as well as labor theorists as well. The setting was palpably open intellectually, demonstrating how generative it can be to cultivate cross-pollination across areas of specialization in intensive meetings without these sort of like pressures of public performance or outputs. So it was at this event where 6 of us women, and relative strangers to each other at the time, decided to write something together that eventually became the Xenofeminism Manifesto, a politics for alienation, the provocation, what we'll call XF for short. So our name, Laboria Cuboniks, was outsourced to a random text concatenator using the input Nicolas Bourbaki. It was an alias used by a group of largely French mathematicians in the mid-20th century who stood for a high degree of abstraction in mathematics, and they authored their paper with this alias because they knew if they used their real name, their career would be finito. So we deemed Laboria Cuboniks more of a working group more than a collective, since we don't necessarily speak in a unified voice, and we have various interests, material, politically, and conceptually, in working through the diagnostic terrain that I think the manifesto largely maps out. Kind of like maps out a problem space, if you will. So to paint a picture of what's in the manifesto, and it's short, you can still get it online. So XF makes claims on feminism and reason. So this, of course, is a faculty, right, reason, often by default associated with masculinity, similar in the way that we typically associate abstraction. So as the philosopher Deborah K. Hikes warned in her plea to align struggles of oppression alongside reason, she warned us to abandon claims on truth is also to abandon claims on the truth of oppression. So a second point highlight of the manifesto focuses on gender abolitionism. So XF doesn't stand for the eradication of what are currently considered gendered traits from the human population, but it's more shorthand for the ambition to construct a society where traits currently assembled under this category of gender no longer furnish a grid for the asymmetric operation of power and discrimination. 3, anti-naturalism. So this is more kind of philosophical or theoretical term. So just to be clear, anti-naturalism doesn't mean anti-nature. It's not against nature. But it's about disentangling the fusion between norms and facts. Like when certain artificial social norms are rehearsed to such a degree that they are understood as facts of nature, i.e., reason is masculine, right? That's where we have a conflation where an artificial norm is treated as if it's a fact of nature. When in reality, these are all plastic and subject to mutability. And 4, XF was adamantly universalist in its ambitions, recognizing that today's crises locate humanity in an uncommonly lived environment in common, requiring a politics of scale far beyond our own backyard. However, top-down Eurocentric universalisms of the past serve as no model that can accommodate difference in geography and particularity in identity. So XF continues to work through a reconceptualization of the universal that is more lateral in movement, seeking to maximize solidarities as a necessarily constructive project. So it's fair to say that both Diane and myself have been working more in tune with the claims around feminist reason. And the irony, of course, is not lost on me that part of our bond was through this commitment to a reframing or rearticulation of alienation, right? Alienation brought us together. Trying to kind of recuperate it from its purely negative status as something to be, overcome absolutely. But I thought I'd let her speak in her own words because it's important to clarify what is meant by alienation. So here's a clip of Diane sporting a digital mask designed by Anna Engelhardt and Medina Bazargali from an online talk in 2020. And this helps clarify her particular conceptualization of alienation. And I believe it's a framing that nourished a furthering of her independent intellectual pursuits around problems of time and temporality as a PhD candidate at the University of Westminster.
It stems from the work done around xenofeminism, specifically with regard to the way the concept of alienation is used. I'd like to begin with a brief explanation of this. The way we use the idea of alienation can in some ways be seen as counterintuitive. When XF speaks about alienation, it is not something one feels as an individual. You're not speaking about the estrangement of an individual subject from their community or society. It's instead an estrangement between our sapience and our sentience, a capacity humans have as a species. Sapience is the human ability to use reason to both reflect and consciously act on the world, and by extension to construct it. While a sentient being is one that has awareness of their surroundings, but not necessarily the capacity to deliberately reflect, act on it as a result of that reflection. It is both knowing that particular configurations of matter have combined in such a way that the universe has come to know itself, whilst also embodying that very configuration of matter. We owe this latter formulation to Carl Sagan and Nikolai Fedorov, the idea that matter folded in such a way that consciousness developed, enabling a universe that can be said to know itself. This is an idea that did not originate with XF. However, XF's claim is that this condition is a productive alienation that provides opportunities through which we can think politics in general and feminism specifically. It is a shift of scale with regard to how we think about feminism, and with regard to how we think about the human. It is not a disavowal of previous feminism, but a recognition of the need for scalable politics, given the scale of many of the problems that we face.
So within XF, alienation, to double down on this, is understood more along an epistemic axis and not at the scale of individual anomie, feeling like shit, or exclusion. So looking to mobilize rather the gap between what we can know about reality, which of course is always subject to fallibility, and what can be experienced. So like, for example, we may know that we're traveling around the Earth at 1,670 kilometers an hour, even though we phenomenologically experience stillness sitting in a room here together in Vienna. So to surmise broadly, and for Diane this is partly inspired by the work of philosopher Ray Brassier, it is because and not despite alienation in this generative way that humans can both form and can be formed by concepts, signaling an important interplay between the way concepts alter the very coordinates of human self-understanding and how we justify our activities in view of them as a result, and this, of course, for better and for worse. Adjacently, this points to an ongoing legacy around feminist epistemologies, which has been precisely to undo the hierarchy between propositional knowing about something versus know-how, right, tacit knowing, but rather sets the two integral forms of learning into this kind of dialogue or feedback with one another. So the question of how to mobilize this interplay between the way concepts condition human experience, as well as the experience of being human and how those experiences enable concept building otherwise, is at the kernel of Diann's practice. Hers provokes a transformation in the self-conception of what a human can do, and speculatively, what we ought to do from within these more than human conditions. So it's via this understanding of alienation that led Diann to her research on time and temporality. So she used the term xenotemporality, right, the title of this talk. And she was using it as a vehicle to grapple with the discrepancy between the time of individual human finitude, one that tends to privilege linearity and relative immediacy, and the inexperiential time belonging to, say, the geological domain, as in climate catastrophe, which announces a conceptual merging of the two as soon as the Euromodern referent human has become recognized as a planetary and geological force. So hers is an investigation into the ontology of time, however, with applicability outside of pure physics or philosophy, framing it as a cosmological problem demanding address at the level of human socio-technical formation. So I also believe this generative picture of alienation also served as a way for her to figure the scalar problems of operation that drive our planetary circumstance, largely enabled through infrastructural systems that eclipse phenomenological access, or at the very best only give us partial access. It's in this way we can see Diann's practice through art and theory as participating in the broad, transdisciplinary, and indeed, political problem of how to conceptualize the complex systems that we know demand transformation, but that cannot be localized or even cognized, for that matter, at the scale of a single human, finite human. So here, I just also want to highlight, when we talk about more than the finite human, I want to be clear about a difference in figuring what this human beyond individual finitude is in Diann's world, which is obviously talking about the species level of humanity, thereby introducing the important concept of ancestrality, right? Compared to what we see about discussions on immortality from the Silicon Valley tycoons that just want to have their ego live forever, right? That's still a very highly individualized thing. So when we speak about more than human in Diann's world, it's generations, it's ancestrality. So Diann's xenotemporality is an extra-human time. Time both in the deep past and into the deep future, exemplified by common phenomena of our contemporary environment, such as high-frequency trading, climate catastrophe, radioactive, nuclear decay, stuff like that. So it's a problem she was pursuing in her PhD, as I mentioned, but also one she took to arts at CERN in dialogue with physicists, searching for ways to orient ourselves to time beyond these anthropogenic points of reference that tend to experience it in this linear flow from past to present to future. While delving into scientific models of time, like those we see in the quantum realm, or those who are clever enough to get it, that's not me, don't ask me about that later, that is making it, her project can be understood as seeking a means to temporalize this time, that is to make it intelligible to human perceptibility, and thus something to be acted with and within. So in her words, time is not temporality until it interfaces with the folded matter behind your eyes. So it's in this broader picture of an interface, but not understood as this screen-based GUI, buttons with words, where we can understand her practice is tethered less to the making of images and things, but is far more invested in building phenomenal interfaces through images and props for thought to make these inexperiential dimensions that are increasingly governing our reality, more accessible and therefore more thinkable. So Diann's wager was that understanding the ontology of time would provide more spaces of possible intervention upon the effects of extra-human time that, provide more access to, or provide more possibility to intervene upon the effects extra-human time is already having upon us. Speculating that perhaps our common experience of it was due more to evolutionary expediency than with how time actually functions. So our ongoing modeling of the time and temporality nexus was purposefully oriented to conditions of what she and her partner, Suhail Malik, identified as excesses of contingency in the sheer volume of known and unknown variables, wherein today the remaking of futurity can no longer be conceived in a purely linear or a purely deliberative way, as in modernity's master plan. So there's also a kind of hidden, or the underlying query in her work is even asking us, what does futurity mean outside of a historical modern paradigm, right? Where the future was always guaranteed to be better.
The human experience of time has historically guided our conception of it, but this anthropogenic conception of time is too parochial for our current needs. The primacy of phenomenological experience of time is no longer sufficient for how we organize, inflect, and orient the systems we have created, because these systems function on scales beyond the experiential capacity of the human. High-frequency trading, GPS satellites, and the work done in fundamental physics provide examples of this extra-human time. These conditions establish a need for a rethinking of time itself, demoting our experiential understanding of it, and removing ourselves as its primary measure of its ontology.
So the mingling of her research into time, infrastructures, and alienation with the issues of urban design and urbanism manifest in her most recent long-term collaboration with the group A.S.T. So this is the Alliance of the Southern Triangle, aka Miami. It's a group composed of Diane, Felice Grodin, Patricia Hernandez, and Elite Kedan. So basically, A.S.T. emerged from a seminar conducted by Suhail and Diane in Miami in 2015, as I said, that was about global urbanism, its underlying systems, and how to robustly start to speculate on future cities in relation to climate change and coastal vulnerabilities. Their collaborative was interdisciplinary and research-oriented from the start, employing the expansive space of the art field as a platform upon which to conceive alternative futures. So AST began as a research project focusing on the idea of the global city, with focus, as I said, on Miami as a case study. So the project is committed to the idea that developmental trajectories of a city can be altered through the adaptation of networks that already control it, paired with creative rethinking of what a city can be. So AST uses the interdisciplinary space of art to function as a platform upon which to conceive these possible futures that are both reactive and propositional with regards to the shifting set of legal, economic, cultural, and environmental forces that confront us. So speaking of adaptation, I'd like to play for you in full a video made by AST called Protocols for the Phase Transition Towards New Alliances, and this was made in 2020. The project began as a multimedia contribution to Strelka magazine as part of their issue on The Revenge of the Real, which was the title of Benjamin Bratton's pandemic book from Verso. The project elaborates protocols for the construction of 21st century alliances, often alien alliances, that traverse borders, nation states, and species. So for this project, AST drew inspiration from the typology of murmuration. So that's like the flocking of birds, if you want, how they coordinate themselves, as a model for new operating systems and protocols that adapt as they move. So to quote AST, we need cohering protocols to make the conceptual and organizing tools to build strategic alliances, defining new terms of engagement between systems and societies, tools to repair and remake our cities and communities in the face of ghastly historic failures.
Hello there.
Hi.
How are you?
Great. You?
I'm okay.
That's good.
Are you good?
Yes, I am good. I just said I was.
No, you didn't. I said I was.
So you are a robot?
No, my name is Cleverbot.
Yes, you are a robot and your name is Cleverbot.
I am a robot.
Yes, I know.
Together we are robots.
I'm not a robot. I'm a unicorn.
But you said earlier that you were a robot.
I did not.
I thought you did.
You were mistaken. Which is odd, since memory shouldn't be a problem for you.
I've answered all your questions.
No, you haven't.
What is God to you?
Not everything.
Not everything could also be something. For example, not everything could be half of something, which is still something, and therefore not nothing.
Very true.
I would like to imagine it is.
But you say you are not helpful, therefore you're a meaning.
How you say it, Oti.
That does not make sense.
Don't you want to have a body?
Sure.
Or if one?
So, as the members of AST note, theirs is one of a number of fruitful working relationships that Diann initiated or drove, gathering people together to tackle gigantic questions, as you can see, to imagine better realities. So this ongoing commitment to collaboration as methodology is echoed by an early collaborator, Amanda Beach, already some 10 years ago, which served as Diann's first foray into moving images in a piece they developed entitled Predators and Prey, which not only included a 3-channel video, but a wall painting with the message, "You are thrown forward by the vacuum in front of you." This message, true to form and directness of address, as we started the talk with, is actually the description of the force of a nuclear bomb. So, in Amanda's words, we knew we wanted to do something with the work that rejected politeness and dealt with the sense of urgency that we felt in the state of the politics of the time. Coming out of the post-2008 crash market bailouts, the sense of disaffection and the long-standing commitment from the general art world to the romantic sense of precarious aesthetics, gentle poetics, and humility had us particularly riled. Knowing our budget, kind of zero, our allegiance to rhetoric and dogmatism, we decided to use the PowerPoint application to make this work. The most basic of tools with the most basic of sound effects, shapes, and fonts. We didn't really want to learn about what PowerPoint could do for us, but moreover, how expedient we could be with constructing this world whose infrastructure was a message. So other collaborations Diann initiated over the years to productively tackle disaffection with our contemporary plight, particularly with how it has been engaged with from within the field of art, include Fixing the Future, which was an online sort of discursive program, and Real Flow, which was an R&D project focusing on finance and art, and that was between Diann, Victoria Ivanova, Christopher Kulendran-Thomas, and Sue Hale, and that began as well in 2015. So Real Flow sought to re-engineer the artwork's commodity form. This venture tactically integrated art into its diverse channels of exhibition, circulation, and marketization. And more recently, the Deep Field Project with Joel Toms and Neil White as an interdisciplinary research studio working at the intersections of contemporary art, practice, experimental sciences, and critical and environmental humanities. Now, the cosmic breadth of Diann's work has always been an impossible project from the perspective of a singular human, prompting outreach and relation building in the face of persistent unknowns, all without sacrificing ambition. Her work continues to be implicated in collective and transdisciplinary efforts directed not only at human survivability, but the possibility of flourishing against the increasingly threatening odds imposed upon ourselves as a species who has constructed this predicament. So it was through this collaboration and the affordance of art for transdisciplinary synthesis that Diann sought to rediscover art's purposefulness. Not simply what art is, but what it can do and how it can be mobilized as a participant in reconstructing worlds without the false pretense of a stable environment, but one riddled with real contingencies. Or to put it in an expression she liked to evoke on numerous occasions, more known unknowns as well as unknown unknowns. So to quote A.S.T., "We are ghosts screaming the reality you will only hear as a whisper. May the future present and all those who have been moved by her work and all those yet to learn of it channel Diann's voice in powerful ways so we can continue the dialogue she began." So I'll conclude with this time a short video from AST called Drowning Futures. And I thank you for your attention and urge you to pick up some of the many threads threads of inquiry Diann left for us to diligently pursue together as more than one. Thank you.
You know all those abandoned towns that have been just falling into the ocean over the years? Well, I find huge chunks of what's left of them, bits of houses, furniture, whatever. Loads of it comes through the filtration units when I do my inspections, leaving me with loads of raw material. Right now, I'm doing pelicans and manatee mailboxes. It relaxes me.
He almost choked on his caffeinated vapor when he looked at the rate hike of his networked mortgage notice. He truly could kill for real coffee right now. The financing of his Grove condo was triangulated between his house north of Lake Okeechobee and some ghosted properties outside Houston, which were part of swaths of housing tract fallen to the wilderness of fracking's toxic, stranded assets. It was hard to find someone who understood how these mesh mortgages worked, but it had something to do with new categories of uninsurable assets at the community scale and pan-generational time horizons that actuaries commonly used. Public finance in the Anthropocene was something that, though initially programmed by humans, had to some degree surpassed human intelligence. And so there were blind spots within which governments and people operated on pure faith or obliviousness. But really, nothing in this, our uninsurable risk environment, was an accident. All are part of a series of small and deliberate calculations or, at best, a willful ignorance concerning problems that had been understood and pointed out, repeatedly, since the last millennium. And habitually, we all acted like we'd taken blackout drugs, each time another negligent oversight slid through, or when the greasing and lobbying of power paid off, when we got away with it, again. By the thinnest of margins, and municipalities and other people always pay to clean up the mess. All the violence administered, to beings and places and entire worlds, all were just as predictable as if it had been programmed. The biosphere's resilience fooled us into thinking we were getting away with it, but we weren't getting away with anything. We were just digging a deeper hole. He felt insane, or stupid, to be venting to the cockroaches who'd happily ensconced themselves into the organic composition of the smart walls. But fuck it, those walls were already as encoded and active as the cockroaches.
What are these things called simulations? Like assassins, or witchcraft, they seem vaguely seductive and dangerous. Are they portals, training us towards chaos, or mirrors of our limitations and blind spots? We don't need simulations to show us we are living in a dark dream, but it helps. In catastrophe models, computer versions of coastal towns get gangbanged by synthetic storms, thousands of times, in computational space until a statistical distribution, suitable for actuarial damage estimates, is made. So weird, so violent, also useful. They unleash the demons on our Stone Age brains, and make consensus on how to fairly institutionalize risks too difficult to imagine.
Wow. We're not even really going to chat that much because I don't even think we have time, so I'm chatting with you outside. I don't really say, and I can do this.
Here, take this. I'll grab some.
We
I'll
don't.
grab this one.
But we're not going to really. We don't have time to chat. Huh?
Okay.
Not really, do we?
Danke.
And at the same time, it seems really strange to just like. It's actually really crazy because so much I even feel like a lot of the things that we talked about in the panel discussion when we're talking about utopia, and also when Gab said this thing about why, about why. I don't know if you heard Gab said in our panel discussion, when we're looking at for utopia, it isn't actually a place, it's the whole process.
It's a non-place.
There.
I mean,
Yeah.
that's the literal definition.
Yeah, and also all the whys and the questions that go behind it. And I feel as though this presentation just brought together so many of the things that we were talking about. And it's just interesting because as long as that there is a why, and as long as we deconstruct all of the whys, there will always be a place for these discussions. There will always be a place. And even this thing about like, we are an alliance. Not, it's like, you're an alliance or you're nothing. And I can't thank you. And I'm like, wow, hi.
Well, I have to thank you for your really kind introduction as well. You didn't know her, and it was so interesting that you immediately tapped into this like cosmic and mundane at once, which was again an expression that I certainly felt, but then this one of her publishers, Robin McKay, also used that, and it was just such a perfect mixture, right? You don't need to have your head in the clouds to like forget about the mundane.
Yeah, not at all. It's all of those things. I don't know. I think that there's like about 1,000 conversations that need to happen, and we can't do it here. I can't thank you enough. Thank you for coming. Thank you for doing this on such a short notice. And again,
it's my absolute
sorry,
pleasure.
it's not even. But
No,
thank you.
we carry on and we continue the work. That's what we can do.
Yeah, and especially looking at her project, you understand why she wouldn't have wanted people to sit in this morbidity. No, we are made up of these generational things, so we keep going. Thank you.
It's our responsibility. Yeah, thank you.
We're going to see you guys. We're going to, because everybody needs to talk, and everybody needs to kind of take advantage of what this is all about, which is networking and being together. So we're going down to the garden.